What makes an individual cross the line from sanity to madness? This is a question that has haunted us for centuries. And perhaps there's no better case study than Richard Trenton Chase, whose life took a turn from the ordinary to the horrific. Richard Trenton Chase's story begins like many others. He was a child with dreams, hopes, and a future. But even in his early life, there were signs of the monster he would become. Chase's fascination with animals wasn't like most children. It was a morbid curiosity, a desire to see what made them tick, literally and figuratively. He would catch rabbits, gut them, and mix their remains with Coca-Cola, which he would then drink. But Chase's behavior wasn't limited to strange dietary habits. He also had delusional beliefs about his own body. He believed his heart was shrinking and his blood was turning to powder. As Chase grew older, his fascination with animals took an even more sinister turn. He was interested in animal mutilation. His descent into madness was a gradual one, marked by increasingly disturbing behavior. He began to have violent fantasies, some so dark they were hard to fathom. In 1975, he injected rabbit blood into his veins in an attempt to stave off what he believed was his impending death. By doing this, he suffered blood poisoning. Having gone to the hospital to be treated, he was involuntarily institutionalized at Beverly Manor and diagnosed by doctors with severe schizophrenia. As his mental state deteriorated, Chase's behavior darkened even more. In December of 1977, Chase's warped fantasies took a turn. His delusions escalated into acts of violence, the line between his terrifying daydreams and reality becoming increasingly blurred. He began to target innocent people, his mind twisted by the conviction that he needed their blood for his survival. Ambrose Griffin was outside of his home after a shopping trip when Richard Chase drove by and shot him. The 51-year-old man was an engineer and had been helping his wife with bags from the car when she saw him fall to the ground. Richard Chase, who began by mutilating animals and nursing bizarre beliefs about his own body, eventually morphed into a cold-blooded murderer, a predator who hunted his prey with chilling precision. This marked the beginning of a reign of terror that would leave an indelible mark on criminal history. How does one grapple with the horror of an unhinged mind, a life spiraling into an abyss of violence? His psychosis had deepened, and his thirst for blood had grown insatiable. Among his victims were Ambrose Griffin, Teresa Wallin, Evelyn Meroth, Jason Meroth, David Ferreira, and Dan Meredith. His MO was as gruesome as it was incomprehensible. Essay, mutilation, and blood drinking were all part of his ritual. Teresa Wallin, who was pregnant, was taking the trash out on January 23, 1978. Chase entered her home through the unlocked front door and shot her 3 times and then stabbed her with a butcher knife. Chase believed that an unlocked door was an invitation to enter someone's property. The authorities, despite their best efforts, struggled to catch Chase. Forensic evidence began to pile up, each piece more disturbing than the last. Blood-soaked walls and human remains hidden away in Chase's apartment pointed to a chilling reality. Yet, despite the mounting evidence, Chase slipped through the cracks, continuing his killing spree. On the 27th of January, Chase was checking homes for unlocked doors when he found 38-year-old Evelyn Meroth's door unlocked. Chase shot and killed 51-year-old Dan Meredith, then moved on to Evelyn, who was also shot and killed. He had mutilated her body after her death. There was also evidence that her blood had been removed. He went on to kill their 2 children, Jason and David, both of whom were less than 6 years old. Chase took the younger of the 2 children, David, from the home. David's body was found a few months later behind a church near Chase's apartment. In his haste to leave the home, Chase had left bloody footprints all over the house. He also took Dan Meredith's car, which was found a few blocks from the murder scene with the engine still running. Due to the severity of the case, the FBI was brought into the investigation. The city lived in fear, its citizens haunted by the Vampire of Sacramento. With the help of the FBI's suspect profile, Richard Trenton Chase was finally apprehended January 27th of 1978, the same day as the murder of Evelyn Meroth, Jason Meroth, David Ferreira, and Dan Meredith. The police went to Chase's apartment to question him, but he refused to open the door. When Chase finally went to leave his home, the police detained him. Once arrested, they discovered that Chase had Dan Meredith's wallet, which was covered in blood. His reign of terror had come to an end, but the nightmare was far from over. Chase's capture was a sigh of relief for the authorities. However, the discovery of his home was shocking. It was a house of horrors. The walls and floor were covered in blood. The police found David Ferreira's brain in a container and his body parts in plastic wrap. In addition, there were parts of Evelyn Meeroth and Teresa Wallen in his refrigerator, as well as a multitude of pet collars on the kitchen counter. On the 8th of May 1979, a jury found Chase guilty of all 6 counts of murder in the first degree. Chase's defense tried to paint a picture of a man who was a victim of his own mental illness, a man whose warped mind led him down a path of blood and violence. They argued that his delusional beliefs and hallucinations were the driving forces behind his horrific acts. But the jury was not convinced. The evidence was overwhelming. The eyewitness accounts, the forensic evidence, everything pointed towards a man who knew exactly what he was doing. His sentence was as severe as his crimes, death by gas chamber. Yet, even in the confines of prison, his madness persisted. He continued to spew nonsensical ramblings about Nazis, aliens, and Nazi UFOs, believing they were after his blood. He was convinced that soap was rendering his blood too thin, that his stomach was backwards, and that his heart stopped beating. His insatiable thirst for blood haunted his cellmates. In the end, even the most monstrous of us are, after all, human. Richard Trenton Chase, the infamous Vampire of Sacramento, was no exception. His life in prison was a morbid continuation of his twisted existence. Even monsters meet their end, and for Chase it came in the form of a fatal dose of antidepressants. Alone in his cell, he succumbed to the demons that had tormented him for so long. The news of his death was met with a grim sense of relief. The reign of the Vampire of Sacramento had finally come to an end. His tragic end, like his life, is a testament to the monstrous capabilities of the human psyche when it spirals into the abyss of madness.